Imagine it. Having flu-like symptoms one day and waking up 40 years later after having been in a sleep-like state the entire time. On today's episode, we will talk about encephalitis lethargica, aka sleeping sickness, one of the greatest medical mysteries of the 20th century. I'm Jay, and this is Somnilopod. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I am so glad that you decided to take the time to join me for a few minutes to learn about something new. Learning and growing is always something that has been important to me, and that's, again, part of why I do this podcast, so that I can not only expand my knowledge, but help others expand their knowledge about sleep and all things related to sleep. So on today's episode, I wanted to talk about one of the greatest medical mysteries of the 20th century. And a lot of people hadn't really heard about this. There have been some references in popular culture that we'll talk about here in just a little bit, but this was a worldwide pandemic that occurred right at the end of the First World War. And I'm not talking about the Spanish flu. This is completely separate from that. The year was 1918, and an esteemed British neurologist, Constantine von Economo, is one of the coolest names ever, who had a really great mustache, was beginning to investigate a disease that was affecting numerous people. And estimates are that over the decade following the First World War, that up to 5 million people were affected by this. The symptoms themselves were strange. They affected a lot of people differently, but there were some commonalities. Initially, things would start with, as I mentioned in the intro, flu-like symptoms. A fever, sore throat, sometimes dizziness. Sometimes they would have a little bit of paralysis in the muscles in their eyes. But some people, after that short initial time, would recover completely and not have any other issues. Others would then develop into an acute stage after a certain amount of time. And that period of time could vary from person to person. It could be a few days, it could be a few weeks, it could be months later. But what Dr. von Economo did was to look at some of the different types, just sort of the general types of this disease that affected people. And one of the most stunning and most common symptom was the fact that it caused people to go into a sort of lethargic state, a drowsy, sleepy state, and they would stay there for quite some time. So Dr. von Economo, he looked at 3 different types of the way this disease manifested. The first was the somnolent I knew I was going to get that wrong. Somnolent ophthalmoplegic. Anyway. Neurologists have good words. Patients in this state, they would become dazed. They would become lethargic and confused and delirious. They would often have upper neck pain and back pain. This was actually the most fatal form of the disease. Up to 50% of patients who contracted this variant of the disease would die. Some people would completely recover with absolutely no long-term effects. So that's one of the things that was so bizarre about studying this information. Another type of manifestation for the disease was the hyperkinetic phase. And these patients, after that initial phase, they would go into a manic phase where they would become hyper. They would have muscle twitches, vocalizations. They would have a general restlessness. They would also develop weakness and fatigue, again, for several days. They would also report periods of paralysis and pain in their face and their limbs. And interestingly, they would have a sleep phase reversal. So they would be awake and alert at night and somnolent during the day, when it's just the opposite of what we are supposed to do. The third stage that the doctor identified, and this is the one that has been reviewed mostly in popular culture, is the amniostatic akinetic phase. And this, even though it was the least common form, this is the most dramatic form. These patients would develop a form of rigidity and lack of movement. It's what doctors call a waxy flexibility. You could pose them in different poses and they would maintain that pose without any desire or initial will to change their position. And patients report that they remained mentally intact, but they just simply had no desire or will to continue to live or to move or to progress any further than from the position that they were in concurrently. Now, the reason I mention that this is the most popular form, there have been a couple of references in popular culture. Recently, there's a television show called Sandman, based on a comic book series by author Neil Gaiman. And there are some characters in the book, and there's an episode that talks about why this may have occurred in relation to some of the characters in the book. But there was also a book written by a physician several years ago in the 1990s called Awakenings. It was subsequently made into a movie with Robert De Niro and Robin Williams. Robin Williams played the physician who was investigating and treating these patients who had developed and been victims of this state, this amniostatic akinetic state of encephalitis lethargica for years. And he found that a treatment for Parkinson's disease also affected them as well. So after years of being in this waxy flexibility state, this unresponsive state, giving these patients this medication caused them to awaken. And it's a really, really interesting and dramatic story. So if you have not seen that, I would recommend either reading the book or checking out the movie. But scientists are still, to this day, unsure of what the cause of encephalitis lethargica is. There has been some speculation, and based on some of the studies and review of the literature around the documents pertaining to these patients, they found that most, if not all, of the patients had a single symptom in common: a sore throat. Some researchers speculate that after having done some investigation, that there is a very rare form of streptococcus that can cause a sore throat that they feel may have also progressed and helped in the development of encephalitis lethargica. However, researchers do point out that there could be several different types of causes for this. So there is still, to this day, no clear cause as to what caused this pandemic back in the early 20th century. Now, interestingly, I was also doing some research, and this wasn't the only reference to this type of disorder happening before. In 1580 in Europe, there was an outbreak. There was also another one in 1673 to 1675 in London, early 1700s in Germany, France and Germany, and again in the late 1700s. And in Italy in 1890, there was some epidemic, or there was some reference to it as well. So there's a very clear possibility that we may see another rise in cases like this unless scientists are able to figure out what's going on. So sleeping sickness may also rear its ugly head once again. So I hope you've enjoyed this information. If you have any questions, if you have any comments for future episodes, please don't hesitate to give me a call. Reach out to me through the email j@somnilopod.com. You can also touch base with me through the socials, through Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as YouTube. And until we talk again, I hope you really do your best to make sleep a priority. Thanks so much.